There are thousands of amazing games out there, plenty of which I haven't even played yet. Elden Ring, Armored Core 6, God of War, Tears of the Kingdom, The Last of Us, Red Dead Redemption, Hades 2, Baldur's Gate 3, Helldivers 2, RimWorld, Dead Cells, Disco Elysium, and so many more amazing games. The list goes on. These This is Cuisineer, a dungeon crawling restaurant management game, and objectively, at least in comparison to previously mentioned games, it's pretty janky. But I am getting ahead of myself. Allow me to start from the beginning. In Cuisineer, the player takes control of Palm, an adventurer. She receives a letter from her parents saying that they are going to leave and explore the world and want to see her before they go. Returning home, Palm finds that her parents have already left and saddled her with the family restaurant and a slew of debts. With the help of the townsfolk, Palm's adventuring skills, and a little bit of luck, the player has to put her family restaurant back together, save it from debt, and join the ranks of the Cuisiners. The gameplay loop is pretty simple. Each day, Palm can choose from two main activities: opening the restaurant or adventuring. While these can be mixed and matched, I would not advise it, as the longer the restaurant is open, the less max health Palm has when adventuring. If Palm goes out adventuring, she returns late at night, too late to make any money from the restaurant. So it is usually best to pick and choose the battles. Time passes when Palm is in the town or the restaurant, but not when adventuring, which allows for the player to thoroughly and carefully play through the adventuring portion if they wish. On the restaurant side of things, there are 3 rush periods during the day. If the restaurant is open during those times, the player will see a large influx of customers, drastically increasing revenue, if they can keep up. I often found myself finishing a rush just as the next began, since the customers from the previous one had just finished leaving, leading to an interestingly high-paced cadence with short periods of respite. Regardless, the restaurant functions much more like those restaurants where a customer will order and claim the order themselves when it is complete, checking out at the end. There are exceptions, specifically with the nobles, who insist you bring them their food instead of them having to go through the effort of moving 2 steps. Regardless, each customer has a set amount of patience after ordering their food, with some having less and some having more, depending on what kind of customer they are. Hot tip: kids, who also happen to move the fastest, have the shortest patience timer, so feed them first if you need to prioritize, though most will likely not have to. Essentially, the customer will enter, sit down, think for a bit, then order, leaving it up to Palm to make the dishes. To make a dish, the player simply needs to select the appropriate cooking station and click the recipe. It isn't even necessary to remember the order or the correct station, as the dishes currently being requested are put in their own menu, making it much easier to select. The dish will then start to cook on its own, then be added to the counter automatically. This helps during rushes, as it requires little input on the part of the player to actually cook food, though it left the act of cooking itself rather underwhelming, turning the game into more of a waiter simulator rather than a cooking simulator. Though I can see why the developers made the decision they did. Regardless, as long as a customer isn't a noble, they will come up and claim their order themselves, eat it, then line up at the register. The player will need to go check out the customers afterwards, but that is as simple as just clicking to collect the money. There are some who will dine and dash, but I lost so little revenue to them that I often just did not bother, as it wasn't worth the hassle. If Palm can't make a dish, either due to an insufficiently upgraded cooking station or a lack of ingredients, it is possible for customers to line up near the register, complain for a bit that their desired food isn't on offer, then storm out. While this doesn't impact daily performance ratings, it does mean that a customer who could have been paying did not sit down to eat. This will cost the player some potential money, but can be avoided by having a sufficient number of ingredients and better stations. To gather ingredients, the player needs to go out adventuring. Initially, only one area is unlocked, but as Palm pays off her parents' debt, more areas will become available, offering different kinds of ingredients based on the region. These ingredients are harvested from the wildlife present in each area, with all the monsters being inspired by the ingredients they provide. Except this guy. I hate this guy. He ends all my runs, and I don't like him. I also have no idea why he has spices and cheese. Regardless, despite my distaste for that one monster, I find that the monster design is quite charming. Killing the little tomays for tomatoes, the sugarcane for sweet sap, the wild rice sprites for rice, or the puffies for flour both makes sense and, since they are designed after the food they drop, give the enemies quite a bit of charm. They also sport a variety of different behavioral patterns, which leads to situations where the interplay between the different monsters can really challenge the player. A good example is the Squeaky monster being paired with a solid frontline enemy like the shield crab. If I go all in on either party, the other chases me off, and I have to either take damage or dodge. Things like this help to keep me on my toes. Adventuring takes place in a dungeon crawling environment where the player has to clear a randomly generated set of dungeon tiles, find the exit, and proceed to the next floor. Each dungeon has two bosses that offer plenty of rewards. Materials for upgrades, like wood and stone, can also be found by destroying the static objects in the environment. To clear this dungeon, the player can have up to 2 weapons, 4 consumables, and some armor, with the only thing there not directly involved with food being the armor. Everything from the weapons to the effects they sport are themed after cooking utensils, or are designed to reference cooking or food in one way or another. The basic ranged weapon is just throwing plates. Giant hammers are actually meat mallets. Spatulas take the place of being the regular old short swords, and the giant sword is just a big kitchen knife. My favorite weapon flavor-wise, the smackerel, is a fish. You smack people with a fish. I love this so much. The theming doesn't stop with just monsters and equipment, with an example being the days of the week, which are named after different flavor profiles. The consumables, which are different flavors of boba tea, can only be bought from the twins, Naicha and Shensu. The basic one just heals the player for a flat amount, but the others offer different effects or enhancements, if the player wants to play a more risky game, both with the gameplay and those flavor profiles. The player can also upgrade their gear in town, as the backpack, consumable slots, and gear levels are all really low in the beginning. To upgrade the backpack and consumable slots, the player will visit Pasta de Nata on sweet, umami, or bitter days. To upgrade the boba teas and unlock new, rather wild flavors, the player must see the 2 bovine twins and give them not just money, but some dishes as well, ensuring the player is at a certain stage in their journey. Thankfully, since there are 2 of them, the shop is This is Cuisineer boiled down to its barest components, and it has plenty of issues. The most obvious is the combat. Despite the sheer joy I found in the naming and design conventions of the weapons and the enemies, the most it reached gameplay-wise was serviceable. Hits always felt light, and the damage of some weapons was so laughable that I just abandoned using them outright. Not to mention the visual clarity of some weapons. Using the durian bomb made it very difficult to see what was happening near Palm. Since this ability doesn't stun enemies, it has the massive downside of making it difficult to see attacks coming through the cloud of green. The attacks also never sounded like they truly connected, no matter what weapon I was using, and I never knew when I was reloading, as there's no feedback on that, visual or audio. The ammo just refills faster. I also gained a hatred for the wild rice sprite, as once they are invincible, you can vaguely tell, but in the middle of battle, it is hard to tell and often leads to me either swinging, it passing through them and allowing them to get some free hits in, or me cowering in a corner taking pot shots to slowly whittle them down as I conserve health. The dungeons themselves, while serviceable, are repetitive, and due to the upgrade economy being really stingy, I ended up revisiting areas more than I would have liked. The restaurant half of the game can also get a bit repetitive. It was a while before I regularly had nobles I had to watch out for, leaving me waiting for my customers to hurry up and eat, as I had nothing to do while I waited for the food to cook itself. The damage upgrades are also laughable, as the difference was usually only a point of damage. The effects, despite being charming in their naming schemes, are rather lackluster as well. The flame and poisoned effects are essentially the same, diluting the pool of perks the equipment can roll with. Sweetened reduces the damage taken, but not by enough that it mattered. Shocked help with spreading damage, but since damage was already low to begin with, it's better just to attack more or use a bigger weapon. The two most useful ones were the shielded and the frozen perks. While I had trouble consistently using the shielded perk offensively, it did help in large groups when I needed to avoid ranged attacks, though it doesn't reflect every ranged attack, just most. Figuring out which was a hassle. Applying the frozen effect to enemies helped to hold them in place long enough that I could get my attacks out, but it was also awkward to use at times, often ending so quickly it only temporarily interrupted the enemy's attack. Not to mention how annoying it is to move at times. The story itself is also told in a rather stilted way, as it simply leads the player from one quest to the next. One excuse to go do something that chains into the next. Get a recipe, repeat. It got rather dull. The cost of the upgrades is also annoyingly prohibitive. I spent a long time upgrading my restaurant to a decent level and discovered materials costs so high that I had to make specific journeys just to upgrade one thing before I ran out of a certain material and had to go back. It really grinds down to a slow halt at the end game. It isn't like this is a bad game by any means. In particular, I like the way the local carpenter Alder stands out of frame and has to bend down to get his face on the screen. The thematically on-point weapon design, the way the monsters are all cleverly designed after food products, and the general gameplay loop. These are all great things about the game that could be used to argue that the game is worth playing despite its flaws. But is it worth my time when there are so many other games with more strong points and less issues to contend with? What makes this game, over all the other options, worth my time? What is the unique factor that keeps on drawing me in? What keeps me here? While trying to answer this question myself, I considered how my feelings towards Cuisineer are not an isolated case. Another example of this is the game Sable. This is Sable. Sable is a laid-back exploration game where the player takes control of Sable as they guide her on her gliding. The gliding, which is a coming-of-age ritual, takes Sable on a journey to see what the rest of the world has to offer, learn about herself, and discover what she wants out of life. The gameplay is rather laid back, choosing to focus on the joy of exploration and interaction with the world. The player simply glides around the deserts of Midden with their possibly sentient glider, helping random strangers, learning about the world, finding stories to uncover, getting chummy with the chums, and exploring the ruins of giant spaceships. There is no risk of death or harm in Sable, as the players have the Gliding Stone, a special artifact that will save the player from long falls, protect them from danger, and allow the player to glide long distances. There will be a decent amount of falling present in any playthrough, as the player can run up to a wall and start climbing it. And there are a lot of tall cliffs. Climbing drains stamina very quickly, and at the beginning, Sable can barely climb. It can be increased by getting chummy with a chum queen and bringing her some chums. The glider also offers itself as a fast form of transportation that will help the player explore the vast desert. To fill out the map, Sable offers a spin on the climb a tower to unlock the map by including cartographers. At the top of some high off point in their balloons, cartographers offer to sell the player a map of the area, unlocking a more detailed version of the player's map. Sable also has something equivalent to dungeons, where the player will be challenged to solve a puzzle or two to progress. These can be found in a variety of locations with a variety of styles and puzzles. Most of the time, the player will be led to these dungeons through either general exploration or NPC quests. NPC quests will often have their players explore a specific form of gameplay or expand on an aspect of the world. These escapades will most likely lead to a mask or two. These masks represent a person's profession and role in life. When someone returns home after their gliding, they must choose the mask that they want to wear, whether that be a guard, a cartographer, a climber, or a friend of the chums. The journey ends when the player returns home and chooses their mask, with the number of available masks being dependent on which ones they acquired. It's a genuinely Titan Chaser is a game about, well, chasing titans. I have reviewed this game before, but for the sake of those who haven't read it, here is a quick summary. In the world of Titan Chaser, titans are a rather normal occurrence, treated as something equivalent to a change in weather, but sometimes they pose an issue to humans living in the city, and someone needs to deal with it. This is where the player comes in, taking a car out on a night drive and dealing with the issues, whatever they may be. For 4 nights, the player will take their car out to diagnose and solve the issue, guiding and redirecting the Titans to make sure the city stays safe. There is no active threat or timer ticking down to demise, just a night drive with the car and a Titan somewhere out there in the fog. Just like the other games I have mentioned before this, Titan Chaser is not without its issues. To answer why I play these games requires me to make a hard pivot into a different subject. Perception. To put it simply, how do we see an object? Well, we see the light that is reflected off of that object. That light is then received by our eyes, and our brains process that information into what we see. We never directly perceive the object. All we are seeing is the light reflected off of the object. Our brains also put in some heavy lifting to translate that stimuli into a coherent image. If someone is colorblind, their perceptual experience is different from someone who isn't, lacking the capacity to receive or process one of those colors. It doesn't change what the object is, just what they are capable of perceiving. Just like how we cannot directly perceive an object, we cannot directly perceive a person. When we talk to people, interact with them, we gain an understanding of their character, who they are, but it is impossible to see the inner workings of a person, as there is no way to directly perceive any mind but our own. How a person speaks to us and how they act is just like the reflected light rays that we see when perceiving an object. A reflection of the person, not the person themselves. Sometimes misunderstandings happen, and we come to a false conclusion about a person, just as optical illusions can trick us into coming to a false conclusion about what we are seeing. These methods of observation are flawed, but are all we have at our disposal. Similar to how we perceive light to understand the nature of an object and interact with people to understand the nature of a person, I think we perceive and interact with the visual elements and the mechanics of a game to understand the nature of a game. There are objective things that we directly perceive, things like the mechanics, art design, and music of a game. But just like light, it is simply a reflection of the game. In essence, the character of a game cannot be perceived directly and must be sought out through interaction with the various components. Just as someone who is colorblind might miss certain aspects of an object, someone may be blind to certain aspects of a game, which may lead to a misunderstanding of its nature. Some games don't have much character, only having the surrounding components, but ultimately not amounting to much. Regardless, it is impossible to tell until you play the game and interact with the mechanics, as you would when perceiving light that shines off an object, or when talking to another person. The pursuit of understanding the character of a game is why I play video games. Fun mechanics, a good sense of style, and a lack of bugs make a game more fun, yes, but they are all secondary to me. The heart and soul of a game is its character, after all. I only really care if the game has character. Sometimes I might be incapable of perceiving some aspects of a game, but I think that's what makes me treasure the ones I can see all the more. The character, created by the developers, is beautiful, and is what caused me to fall in love with video games in the first place. So, to answer the question I keep asking, I keep playing these games because I find the character of these games intriguing, despite their flaws. Now, I'm not arguing that mechanics and design are just there for show. While the character of a game is still the most important aspect, the mechanics and design of a game are still critical components. The better the mechanics and the design, the easier it is to get into a game, which is why I have a hard time playing the truly bottom of the barrel stuff when I am searching. The games I mentioned previously were all good games with some frustrating flaws, but they were all still made with love. To put it in the form of an analogy, let's talk about cooking. There are two aspects to cooking, the nutritional value and the taste. It is important to have all the nutritional value in a diet, but if it tastes like mush, what's the point? This balance is important, as the same goes for the taste as well. A good tasting meal without nutritional value can taste good, but it is ultimately worthless. Cooking is a balance of nutritional value and taste, just as video games are a balance of character and mechanics. The nutritional value of a meal is the most important thing. Fancy food from an expensive restaurant is nice, but nothing beats out a relative excitedly showing off their new cooking skills, the local restaurant's family recipe, or a parent's homemade cooking. I guess that is why I play these games, because despite the bit of charcoal from the mistakes the relative made, the weird tasting sauce from the local restaurant, and that oddly shaped vegetable your parent insists is good for you, I still love the taste of home.